Welcome back. Today we're talking with Dr. Elyse Bruns from Waukesha Vision. Dr. Elyse, glad to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. Just in case if you're an avid listener, we just had your husband, Dr. Nick Bruns, on, and he had a fairly unique situation for the show in terms, and he told us a bit of a story about you relocating, and then both optometrists, but both came into your very unique position. So we wanted to get your take because when he told me, yeah, she's an optometrist that took over an ophthalmology clinic, I'm like, how does that happen? So, like, I didn't think you could do that. How does that come to be?
Yeah, it's a kind of a longer story, but I'll try and make it brief. So we moved from Michigan to just outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin for Nick to take his current role. And at the time, we went house hunting and toured a home that we loved. Found out from the neighbor that he is also in eye care. So we didn't know what type, but we thought maybe we could write him a nice sweet letter pleading with him, to take our offer since we were all in the same field.
Yeah.
And he was nice enough to do that for us. And so he ended up being an ophthalmologist here in town. And about a year after we had closed on the home, he sent us an email saying, I'm thinking about retiring. Do you have any interest in owning your own practice? Which Nick is very happy in his role, but that was always a professional dream of mine to own. So I took him up on that and said, well, let's map out what this looks like. And maybe what everyone is thinking is they do surgery, we don't. How does that work? Thankfully, he had retired from surgery 6 or 7 years prior to us working out our deals. So he was just practicing full scope medical ophthalmology. So some minor surgical procedures that optometry, depending on what state you're in, would or would not do. But for the most part, his day to day was what I would love to do. So that's how we got connected and started that process.
All right, very good. So just out of curiosity, like what are some of the things in your day to day?
Most of the day is disease management. So diabetics, glaucoma, macular degeneration. I inherited quite a few complex patients from him because he had been practicing for 30 years and these people aged with them. So I have a ton of background on these folks, which is great. But they do come, with 70, 80, 90 years worth of ocular history. So the first couple of years were longer clinic days, just trying to get a handle on what everyone needs in their ongoing care. But now that I've been here for a few years, I know all that background and it's a lot smoother than it was in the beginning.
Sure. Okay, very good, very nice. So I have to think like, I mean, this was somebody, yeah, you just kind of happened upon this retiring doctor through your house hunting, and but essentially ended up acquiring a practice. And with that comes like a certain level. So like that's relatable to probably more of the listeners, even though like, hey, somebody else could be listening and be like, oh, there's a almost retired ophthalmologist in my town that's kind of scaled back too. But I think the more even more relatable thing. So I guess that's a good side note. Like don't take that for granted. Like, look under those places, those rocks, if that's the kind of work you want to get into. And when you're looking to either start out or expand. But yeah, there's a certain amount of due diligence, I think, which is a more relatable thing that comes along with acquiring a practice. And I think we were talking before, but did you come up with any like how was that process for you? And were there any stumbling blocks or lessons learned in that process? 'Cause I think that'd be valuable.
Yeah, it's a little different looking at a services only practice versus one that has retail optical contact lenses. That's what we're used to looking at. So, you look at the report and then you go, okay, what's our cost of goods sold at this practice? And that's how you come up with the valuation number. For services only, it's services of the services. There's very little overhead besides staff and some minor equipment leases. So the books look different when you're analyzing that type of practice. At the time, the surgeon was affiliated with a local hospital group and helped serve call for that group. And he no longer wanted to have to go in at 3 in the morning to serve call. And so part of our agreement was that, he didn't want to be affiliated with that hospital group after the transition. And in my mind, I thought I also don't want to go to the hospital at 3 in the morning. It's just not what I want to do. So it didn't really cross my mind to think about what that would mean if we were no longer affiliated with that group, aside from, patients maybe asking a question about that. It turns out that there was some due diligence we didn't do because of that. We did not understand contract negotiations with payers as well as I thought we did. If you're affiliated with a hospital group, there's some negotiations that happen. If you're affiliated, that when you're an outside private practice, you're just so small that in my mind, they don't really care to sit down at the table to talk to you about that. So we found out, about 6 months after we had taken over the practice, it just took that long to understand, Medicare payments and Blue Cross and the other Advantage plans here in town, that we just were not recouping the receipts that he was. We were billing the same amount. We kept all the fees the same so that we could compare apples to apples after we took over, and for every $100 that he billed out, we were not collecting that 100 that he was, we were collecting about 85 is a good analogy. So we took about a 15% haircut because our contracts are just not the same as when you're affiliated with that hospital group.
Sure.
So that took a long time for us to understand. I think, all of us, if we had known that, we would have not paid what we had paid for the practice because we are expecting better cash flow. So after about a year, our first year after looking at a full year of financial reports, we decided we had to make a change. We couldn't be just services only and expect to survive without either seeing a lot more patients than we were. Where do those patients come from? Or do we go back to the payers and say, we need to renegotiate our rates? And we did try doing that with limited success as a private practice. We did consider, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, so yeah, so my mind would immediately go to, so like first off, yeah, that's a big deal, right? Like, the same amount of work, same type of schedule, it could even be a full schedule. I don't know if he was too, but same number of appointments and everything, and you're automatically, because of that change or that non-affiliation, you're automatically 15% less top line before you even do anything else. And I think you mentioned it earlier, but just to like point out, I mean, I have to imagine with like how insurance reimbursements work and all those things that, like I said, it did take you a while to kind of figure that out and figure out why exactly all the reimbursements were smaller, than what you were expecting.
Yeah, we had thought to call, most of the major plans around here to confirm that they were not going to indeed pay us a different amount because of the degree, meaning MD versus OD.
Okay.
Because I know that it does exist. I don't know if it's as prevalent as it used to be, but it's primarily Medicare-based population. So Medicare pays us the same as them
Okay.
for those codes. But, the private commercial places we did call. I think there was one plan that did still have two different fee schedules, but it was such a small percentage, we didn't think about it. So yeah, quite a surprise. And it took us a very long time to understand what's happening. Why aren't we, making the money that he was?
Right, right.
And we didn't think it was attrition because we had expected a little bit of that going from an MD to an OD, also older male physician to younger female physician. We knew some people were going to leave the practice, but I think we're through that now. We're on year 4. So I think the people who are going to stay are going to stay. And we've actually had people come back.
Excellent. Very good. You got to that point where you kind of had to make the decision, like, do I make this up? Do we make this up in volume or do we add the other retail components, right? Because so in my mind, it's if we're all going through this, right? Any like decrease in sales and how are we going to make up that cash flow? Well, we can either do more of what we're already doing or we can add stuff, essentially, right? Or we can, try and trim things down, but that's a big thing to I mean, it's a hefty amount to overcome just by not adding any more to the top line revenue, right? So yeah, so I can see that. So I think you said, yeah, you'd brought in the retail component then when at first you were kind of thinking you might, I think were you happy like going forward, just thinking, oh, I'm just going to have this, this disease management practice and don't have to, deal with any of the other retail components of it. And now you're like, oh, this is probably not a bad idea. To bring it back in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I loved doing just the services, not having to deal with, prescription remakes and patients being unhappy after they spent all this money, on their glasses or contact lenses. I didn't have to fit a contact lens there. So it's very different style of practice and I did enjoy it. And I think there are probably people who could have figured out a different way to survive. But we ended up merging in an office I had like a mile and a half away. That was a more standard optometry clinic, families, kids, glasses, contacts. We moved into a larger suite in this medical building. So just increase square footage so that we could put the two together and still have enough space. Because the ophthalmology office was 2 exam lanes, front reception, OCT room, visual field room. That was it. It was very small, but he didn't need it to be big. So now we're 4 exam rooms, 2 offices put together,
Okay.
medical and retail.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of has about, I mean, did that change a lot of your day to day, or you're just kind of consolidating and sharing some resources so that you could both like thrive under one roof?
Yeah, managing the schedule was definitely something I was worried about when you put those two things together.
Yeah.
Because when you see disease management, you get kind of into the right headspace and you know what you're doing and you know what tests need to come with that. And if you throw like a 2-year-old in the middle of that day, it can really mess up, the flow of, what
Sure.
you're thinking all day long and then also just clinic stuff. So it took us a while to make sure that, each day the schedule was going to run smoothly and we didn't have a patient kind of in the wrong spot. And I know every practice deals with that with scheduling. It's just wrong patient, wrong time. And so it happens.
Right.
I would say still most of my day is disease management. I do have an associate and she's been seeing most of the vision routine stuff. But the idea is to fill in the gaps with those
Right.
folks. Yeah.
For sure. Very good. Well, it sounds like, I mean, to me, it sounds like a very workable solution to a kind of a hairy situation, right? Because, I mean, the ink was already well dried on this deal. So it's not like you can change anything. You just have to figure out how to make it work. And it sounds like you're doing it.
Yeah. Working on it. Working on it. Yeah.
Good deal.
I guess the one thing is the MD did stay on for a year and a half to help with that transition.
Yeah.
And he cost a pretty penny, so we kind of shortened his stay a little
There you go.
to kind of help with that. After we realized our cash flow issue, we chatted with him and he understood,
Yeah, that's good. Very good. Well, look, this has been insightful. Even just like sharing this experience, it's not something that a lot of people would be maybe as willing to share because it's like, we all like in this world of social media and kind of grandstanding and everything. It's like, no, we like to get down into sometimes things go wrong, folks. And we're grateful to hear that not everybody's life is Instagram ready. And like things happen, we got to overcome it. That's when we're going to be a business owner, a practice owner. I mean, like, that's what we sign up for. It's like the challenges are never going away. It's just kind of how big and how much we can adopt and overcome them, right? So,
very humbling experience becoming an owner.
yeah, for sure. Well, look, I ask this almost at the end of almost every interview, and you may have mentioned something already, and it's something that you maybe find worth restating or even elaborate on, or it could be something since this interview has been a little bit different than a lot of others. Maybe it's something that we haven't even covered yet, but we just ask this: what is one piece of advice you would ask or you'd give to others who are on their journey in, the world of independent optometry practice ownership?
I wish I had known that question ahead of time.
What is your
I
gut response?
Mm, I think it's top of mind just because I recently read it, but know your why
Okay.
you're doing what you're doing so that you can get your team on board to achieve that goal along with you to help you get there.
Mm,
Try not to lose sight of, why you wanted to be an independent owner
for
when it gets
sure.
tough.
Yeah, for sure, right? Because we all kind of get in, or at least most of us, anyways. I think all of us in your field, more so than any other like large group that I've talked to, but in a lot of business ownership, we all have kind of this noble or just this higher purpose that we're looking to serve, in addition to all the other things that come along with business ownership and being in more control and crafting the service the way you want it to look and how you want to interact with people. But it's the purpose and the impact and those like bigger vision items that can kind of really easily get lost in the weeds when you're going through your day to day, right? So, so having that kind of what are some ways? First off, and you don't have to share if you don't want to, but if you do, since I'm coming at this off the cuff with you, like, is that something you just started getting into? Like, have you like defined your why yet, or is that something that you're still working on?
It's something I had been thinking about usually on airplane flights to conferences, because that's when you get re-inspired, about how to explain my why to the team. And we recently got through our like 5 pillars or 5 conventions for the clinic and what those all mean for everyone in each staff role. For management also, I wanted input from everyone, what do you want from me? When we're talking about looking up, I actually have them up on my wall now.
Oh, good.
So the first one's details matter. So what does that mean, from an ownership? What does that mean for me? What does the front desk need to do to make sure that that's something they're working on? And it just helps with everyone understanding like how that fits into their role. And management's the hardest part I've found, like with staffing. And so if we have these set goals and this is our culture, if you don't fit into it, this isn't something you want to be a part of, then, we can part ways amicably or figure out a solution to the trouble that they're having. And this way it's known by everybody and not just in my head about what I envision for the practice. It's written down somewhere, they're able to see it, and we
Very
review
good.
it now.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that's pretty much what I was driving to, right? Like, how are you keeping it in front of your team? And it sounds like writing it down and by involving everybody in the process, you said, and then holding them like there's some element, I'm sure, of like each other holding each other accountable to those pillars, by role. And maybe you have some metrics or just in general discussion and team meetings about staff meetings about those types of things. Am I kind of on
Yeah.
board?
Yeah. Like you said earlier, just try not to get lost in the weeds because it is very easy to get stuck if you're having a particular problem or you run into something you weren't expecting. It's easy to lose track of, where you want to go, and or you may have it all in your head and you have this awesome vision, but if you don't communicate it to your team, they don't know that.
Yeah.
you know I think that's something I've learned is if I don't tell them where I think the ship is going, I mean, they might not understand why I'm making the decisions that I made if they don't understand, you know, I'm thinking 10 steps ahead of where we are right now.
Very powerful, very good stuff. So thank you. It is a big deal because if you don't write it down and share it, then your vision just remains a dream and an idea and swirling around in your head. And someday it's just going to be like one of those regrets or things that we didn't think we could get to or accomplish, right? So if we want to make it a reality, those are the types of things you got to do. And so that's great. Thanks for sharing that. So,
Yep.
and thanks for all your time today, Elyse. I really appreciate it, the story and the insights you were able to bring to this interview. So, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You bet.